All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's September 2nd, 2020. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the CEO and founder of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team and then showing them the ropes. If that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a video recording of this session to the Office Hours channel, as well as follow up with an email that you can share with your team. So with that said, let's kick things off here. So a number of good announcements have happened since last week. One is something I'd like to point out is we've started doing highlights of office hours. These are some of the good sessions that we have. So I'll share this link. So if you look at this playlist on our YouTube channel, you can see some outtakes that we've had, clips from other sessions. These are much shorter, like 10 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, instead of listening to the full hour-long session. So there's a guy, Andy, on our team that is helping put that out. So here's the link to that. Also, while I remember, let me open up the Slack window here so we can keep this interactive. There. So the next announcement is just something that we've run into, and a heads up for everyone else. One of the things we all really were excited about with Terraform 0.13 is the ability to do for each on modules. And turns out that works pretty well for simple modules, but if those modules depend on providers and you need to pass different providers, there's a bug with that. So you cannot do for each on modules like that. And I can't copy and paste here in the presentation mode. So I guess I'll gotta share that with you guys later. Has anybody tried to do for each on modules and run into this problem? All right. So unfortunately, this was not fixed in the latest 2 Terraform releases that dropped. So in the last, I'm just going to get out of this preview mode here so I can click on these links. So in the last week, there have been 2 new Terraform patch releases, just to be aware of. So if you're not already on 0.13.2 that dropped 4 hours ago, you are behind schedule. And then there's 13.1. So check out the release logs, see if it fixes any of the issues you've had. So it doesn't fix the problems that we've encountered. The other problem that was raised by Lauren in our Terraform channel is that there's a bug where Terraform will consistently show a diff if it's on an empty value. So it's not handling empty values the right way. So here's that. I think it's just faster to click here. So if you go to the Terraform channel, you see the conversation here. Where this is a problem is if you're doing things like joining. We call this the join splat pattern. This was very common in 0.11 and 0.12 when you needed to return outputs on modules that had counts. So there's a possibility that you have 0 of something, no outputs. So we would use the join splat pattern for that. And now in 0.13, that's showing always as a diff. And it doesn't matter if you use try, which is the better way of doing it now. try has apparently the same result. So this is the current best workaround here. Any questions related to that one? All right. So we've zipped through here. We've covered the releases. Now, hold on. Let me tell my dog to stop. Charlie, no. Shh. Shh. All right. Mailman. So what we got here is automatic Semver releases. We covered this briefly in a past office hour session, but I wanted to call this out again because it's really awesome and I think others will benefit from it. So how can you do automatic Semver releases when you merge to master automatically? So we've been doing this at Cloud Posse for some time, is always cutting a release when we merge to master. This is because with so many projects, with over a couple hundred repositories, we cannot have a same cohesive release strategy for our modules. So every time we merge to master, it's either a patch release or a minor release, and that's why we encourage everyone to do version pinning. The thinking on this for us is that everything is breaking for somebody, even if it's a bug fix. So maybe you had a workaround for the previous situation, and now we fixed that upstream, but now our fix fixes your fix, and this is why it's really hard to try and figure out what is truly a stable version of something. So we always release frequently. And we found a project. It's called the Release Drafter GitHub action. So if you go to github.com/releasedrafter/releasedrafter, this is the GitHub action that we're using. And we chose this because it just has the most versatility, the most configuration options, and you can really try and have it capture what your release process is. Also, it can just draft releases for you. You don't have to actually have it publish that release. So if you want to have it just append every new pull request merge to master to the current release draft, it can do that for you. So it handles other release workflows as well. So our workflow is defined in, like, an example of us using this is you go to cloudposse.com/Terraform null label, and you look at the auto-release.yaml. This is our configuration now for how we do automatic Semver. And it works a few different ways. So the first thing to point out is that the default type of release that we're always doing is a minor release. So if none of the other conditions match, just cut a minor release. However, if it's labeled patch, if the PR is labeled patch or fix or bug fix or hot fix, then we automatically make this a patch release, so we bump the last part of the Semver. So Semver looks like this, major, minor, and patch. So we always bump patch if one of these is present. And then lastly, if it has a minor or enhancement label, then we always bump the minor. And finally, if it has a major label, we would bump the major tag. That being said, we at Cloud Posse are not using the major at all right now. All of our modules are at 0 dot something, and this is a special case in Semver that a lot of people are not familiar with. And the situation is when the major version is 0, it's used for initial development, and it means that basically anything can change at any time. So since Terraform itself is at 0 dot something, we kind of feel like our modules need to also be at 0 dot something. All right. Okay, so let's show what that looks like. So every time something is merged to master, we can go over here to releases, and we see here are our releases. We see these are patch releases. So if I look at PR100, we see that it was labeled patch. So that's why when it was merged, we automatically cut a patch release for it. Any questions? All right. Then let's just jump right into some talking points. I scanned through the history of messages in the Office Hours Slack channel. If you have a question and you haven't posted it yet, just head on over to our Slack team. So that's slack.cloudposse.com, slack.cloudposse.com, and then head over to the Office Hours channel here.
Hey, Eric, sorry to interrupt you, man.
Yep.
You didn't cover the one thing that was on your list, which I'd actually love to hear about, that
Oh,
context.tf
ah,
pattern.
shoot. Thank you, man.
Yeah, I'm
That,
interested to hear what y'all are up to because I missed that somehow.
yeah, this is a non-breaking change, but a very important and a very significant change that we're rolling out to all of our hundreds of Terraform modules at Cloud Posse. So let me start by introducing it. So going back here, so I want to talk about here. Yes. So I want to talk about a new Terraform pattern that we're calling context.tf. So one of the things that Cloud Posse does is use this module throughout all of our modules called Terraform null label. It's a very opinionated approach on how to label your resources in Terraform, or sorry, using Terraform, but across all providers. So whether you're using Google Cloud or Mailgun or AWS providers, how do you generate resource names that are consistent everywhere? So this module is really a glorified string concatenation module that does some normalization. We have some opinionated attributes or some opinionated dimensions that of data that we accept. So like the namespace of these resources, the stage, which means the operating stage that this is in. So we typically have one stage per account. The environment, there are many more attributes here that are not shared here, but there's an environment field, there are attributes and these things. So all of these get concatenated together and ultimately produce a label that looks like this. So something like EG prod bastion public. So EG is the namespace, example given, prod is the stage, bastion is the name, and public is an attribute. So the problem we've had is there are a lot of variables here. There's a lot of boilerplate. There's a lot of copy and paste between modules. And we've been following historically this thing where we stick it always in variables.tf. And then we copy that around to all of our modules. But it's kind of like, depending on when that module was created or last updated, that's kind of like when we jumped off the rails for what attributes or what variables we supported. So it's been frustrating for us, but also our users, that sometimes we don't support enabled, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't support environment because that was added much, much later. Now we do. We have many other things like the label order. This was added later on, so you can, if you don't like the way we order all these parameters in the label, you can change that order by passing label order. Only it wasn't supported everywhere, because this is a lot of work to try and keep it in sync everywhere. The other thing is, when you start using null label everywhere, let's go to like an example like Cloud Posse Terraform, like S3 bucket, let's say. We go into main, and here you see we're specifying the label. That's a lot of parameters to pass. You also notice we don't pass all the parameters here, so it's easy to forget it. And it's not uncommon to have like half dozen or a dozen labels in a module for all these different resources. So to fix this problem once and for all, here's our solution. If you look at Terraform null label, you go into the exports directory, we have this file. It's called context.tf. This is the boilerplate. This is the stuff that should be dropped in seamlessly into every module we ever create. You can use the pattern as well. There's nothing saying this is only for Cloud Posse. What's beautiful about this is everything works just as before. You have all the same variables, except for the ones we were missing, and we have a well-typed context variable that we can just string through all our modules, through all our labels, everywhere. It's like a this object in like Perl or something like that, if you ever used Perl's implementation of this. So what we have here is at the top of this is a module that we now include in every project. We always have a this module. And it's one invocation of Terraform null label where we pass all these variables. And that sets up our context. And now we can pass this context anywhere we need it. So let me show you how this is beneficial. So if I look, we haven't updated all of our modules yet. This is happening as we speak. Our RDS module was updated. Or not yet. There's probably what was that?
CloudTrail is the one I used last night.
CloudTrail is the one we did last night. All right, let's see here. Where's CloudTrail? There we go. All right, so here's an example of where we've updated it. Thanks, Hugo, for that. So context.tf here, you'll see this file was copied in from Terraform null label. We have a comment here indicating that you shouldn't edit this file. We also enforce that this file is typically not changed by having our code owners specify that context.tf. If that file changes, somebody at Cloud Posse's got to review it because that file should generally not be changing. All right, then we use it like this. So now throughout main, you see if we want to just enable or disable CloudTrail, we just reference module.this.enabled. So this is that thing. The name is module.this.id. The tags come from module.this.tags, and it's just super clean. And we didn't have to even create another label in this simple example for CloudTrail to support it. Let's see, what's another good example? I think we updated EKS, is that true?
EKS IAM role was updated for sure, or is like a new package, I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, let's see here, this was 5 days ago, 15 days ago. Let's see if this was updated.
One question while you're digging into that. So let's say I have 20 null label usages across my project. Does this mean I can now pass around a context object to each null label, and then it would be easier configuration?
Yeah, check this out. So here we do that. Here we want to create a new label that adds cluster as an attribute. So all we did was pass module to this context and then update attributes with that.
Yeah, that's sweet. I like that.
And let's see, so that was one example. Let's see if there's another one here. I'm looking at EKS node group. This has context.tf. So here we're doing that same pattern. We wanted to add an attribute of workers, and then we specify module this context. So any questions on this pattern that we're introducing?
Who came up with it?
So it's interesting. This concept of the context was actually introduced back in 0.11. But we'd never solved how we would replicate it across our modules, and it just seemed too much work to copy and paste all of that into variables across all of our modules. We also didn't fully follow through on the implementation of it, and we found some bugs with it. So I would say it's just been this dormant code in the null label module for the past year or two. Then Jeremy, a member on our team, independently decided he wanted to implement this. So he re-implemented it without even knowing this was there because we barely used it anywhere. So like Leibniz and Descartes discovered calculus at the same time. It was kind of like the same thing. Different notation, but the same general outcome. And that's what we achieved here. So with much review, much going back and forth, we standardized this interface. We came up with this concept of the context.tf that we will now replicate across our modules. So one of the other reasons why we love this concept of the context.tf is we can use now GitHub Actions to automatically run on a cron job across all of our modules, download the latest version of that, run the tests automatically, merge automatically if the tests pass, and then release automatically because we have the auto releaser. So I think we're reaching a really beautiful point in automation for the Cloud Posse ecosystem of Terraform modules.
Sweet, I'm stoked on it. It'd be cool.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Any other questions related to why we use this context pattern, or why we use null label, or why you hate null label maybe? Always looking for feedback.
This is Sheldon. I've
Hey,
had
Sheldon.
a great experience with it. My first big project, I adopted that. I added a randomization for random pet names as well on it so that I could generate unique resources. And it provided a very consistent way for all my RDS resources and everything to be named. So I'm definitely appreciative of that. And I'm going to look at the improvements with the context because I wanted to examine it, but I didn't see it used very much. So this is definitely a great step forward.
Yeah. One thing you'll see here is now we're rapidly rolling this out on our side, and it's just it always blows my mind to see just how much activity there is here. Like this repo was updated 1 minute ago, this repo was updated 4 minutes ago, this one 5 minutes ago, 23 minutes ago. But anyways, if you just go to Cloud Posse and you look through some of these, I think most of these are related to us starting to roll this context TF pattern out everywhere. Also, what you said there about the pet, the random pet, I just haven't thought about how we incorporate it, but I've wanted to add a placeholder variable for a random pet in the null label. So anytime you need a pet, you could just do like $pet or something, and that would be automatically replaced with a pet. So let's see here, null label.
You know, what I tried to do with a forked copy of the module was add a switch in there that was enable or disable, and upon enabling it, it used the random resource to generate a pet name, and then added it as one of the attributes, so that it would be appended to the name. I think that's how I ended up doing it, but I had some problems working through the handling of the strings coming through with null, and I ended up not being able to get that done quickly enough.
Yeah, well, if it ends up becoming something you need to do again, reach out and we can work maybe on coming up with a way of doing that. So here's an example of we have this label order where you can specify the order in which the labels are. One of the things I'm thinking we should expand this to support is a notation that allows you to select tags as well. So if you're passing other arbitrary attributes in consistently to your modules, you could have something like comma tags.bu for business unit or something. And that would appear then in the labels generated. Or it could be like a synthetic.pet name. And when it sees that, it'll automatically replace the synthetic.pet name with a pet's name in the module. Also, this is one thing that blows my mind. Is the amount of, this module, 16,835 clones in one day. It just blows my mind how many projects are using this as a module. All right. That wraps it up for Terraform null label and the new context pattern. Any questions before we
I would just say that should be one of your highlighted office hours. Sections. I'd like to send that to a couple of my coworkers just so, because I'll fold that pattern in
Yep.
so that we have only one label and then we're just passing around context, and so that they know what the hell I'm doing. It'd be nice if that's easily
Yeah.
shared.
Yeah, we will post that shortly. I'll let Andy know on our team to slice that up. All right, so then to talking points. Let's see here. So I'm just going to do these a little bit out of order. One of these is a pretty quick question to answer, I think. So it was asked in SuiteOps earlier this week in the Office Hours channel. Let's see here, going back to Office Hours. Here, so not sure how to say the name, but he's trying to install Lens on CoreOS. So Lens, first of all, is a really awesome like IDE for Kubernetes that has now been acquired by Mirantis. So if you haven't checked out Lens yet, check out Lens. It gives you something that looks almost like VS Code, but for Kubernetes, where you run this locally, you connect it to your Kubernetes cluster, and you can very easily interact with that system without typing a bunch of kubectl commands. So the problem he's facing is basically when he's running this on CentOS, he has an error where it can't find the shared library. So rather than trying to generally answer this specific question, this is such a common problem when installing Go apps that I figured I'd just talk about how we typically end up solving it when we need to do it. So usually this means that you need to install the missing GTK package. This is, I see, I'm not sure if you tried doing this here. Still getting the same error. So one of two things is that this was still not the package that include that library. Or you need to run, was it LD cache or LDD cache clear? There's some command to refresh your dynamic linking cache on Linux. What I was gonna, let's see what package it was I came up with when I searched for it, and we'll see if that's the same one you were trying to install. No, that's not what I want to click on. I guess I linked to the wrong thing. So we'll just go back to see here. So the library that it's struggling to find is libgtk3. So let's see this and search for CentOS. .2, and I think that might have been what you were trying to install, and it was. So if that's not solving it, and if clearing your LD cache doesn't fix it, anybody else have other suggestions? Also, make sure this is the right architecture for your OS. If that's the wrong architecture, that's also not going to work. All right, then let's move on to the next question. So this is a question from you, Matt Gowie. I want to cover. You asked this actually 1 or 2 weeks ago. So let's go stock that question in the Office Hours chat. If you click this pin, you'll see the questions that we've queued up to review. So you're asking, it'd be great to chat through the solutions folks are using to solve the problem of disjointed Terraform workflows. For example, I have a project where we're using RDS with a bunch of databases. The RDS instance is, of course, in a private subnet, and access is only granted to a particular application security group or bastion security group. We want to use the Postgres Terraform provider to provide bootstrapping of the database and its extensions and roles. Now, the problem is that the Postgres provider can't connect to the RDS without an SSH tunnel or without running Terraform like as part of a Terraform Cloud Runner in the VPC. So my solution was to carve up our project into multiple Terraform projects and directories, and then when creating a new workspace or environment, the flow is to do this. First, we run Terraform apply. The AWS infrastructure is in a particular directory, and then that creates the RDS and Bastion, etc. Then create the SSH tunnel to the RDS instance through the Bastion host. Then once that's set up, we go to the Postgres Terraform directory, and from there run Terraform apply. This works, but of course I wonder if there's a better way, and it'd be great to hear how others are tackling this kind of problem. So I'm going to open up the thread here, and one of the looks like this UI has changed a little bit, so I'm struggling with why I'm jumping around here. So view the message, that drops me here, and then here we go, and then that updates here. So Alexander mentions that one is that if you're a TerraGrunt user and would like to use Terraform's native Postgres provider, you can use the before and after hooks to establish that port forwarding on the Bastion host to using the SSM session manager. Obviously, this requires that your Bastion host is registered with the SSM manager and that the agent is running on the host, plus the IAM permissions attached to the profile, etc., etc. So before the hook starts port forwarding, TF Post provider in your module connects to RDS via SSH channel and provisions the required resources. After that, the hook stops and port forwarding is terminated. You can also use a Lambda function deployed to your VPC subnets to provision the required resources. I have a TF module with such a Lambda, open sourced on GitHub. It doesn't yet support SSL connections for Postgres, but it is able to provision the databases and roles and instances with Postgres and MySQL engines. So the latter pattern here, this is kind of like the pattern that Amazon recommends if you're doing anything with like ECS and CloudFormation, or CloudFormation and any other thing that needs post-processing to configure it. Their recommendation is basically just trigger a Lambda and have that create the database and the user. On the one side, I guess once you've invested in the pattern and you have kind of your own workflows to do that well, it's pretty extensible. Let's be fair that any solution we come up with here is going to sound pretty much like a Rube Goldberg apparatus with a lot of triggers and processes kicking off here and there. But that is one. Now, the solution that you're taking, Matt, about decomposing this project into different like workspaces is typically what we do. And we like to say is like, let's decompose this based on what a common life cycle is of that resource. So the life cycle of DDL or management of that for a resource is decoupled from the life cycle of creating that database. Like the database is something that happens typically once, and possibly you increase the memory or the performance characteristics, but that is the most common lifecycle operation there. And then DDL operations like creating new databases or roles or users, that has a totally separate lifecycle, so we run that separately. And what that means is, yeah, the cold start problem when you're trying to bring everything up from scratch to fully running requires a little bit of extra hacks in your workflow for doing that. But the day-to-day operations are trivial, and the blast radius is very small, because when you need to run like Terraform Cloud on that one workspace, it's very obvious how it's going to work and what it's going to do. Now, for what you're talking about, VPC connectivity, and that the fact that the RDS is in a private VPC, this is where there is an announcement just in the last 2-3 weeks or so, where Terraform Cloud now supports remote operations in VPCs in your infrastructure. So you can deploy Terraform Cloud runners inside of your VPC. It has the same fundamental problem, like you can't do the rest of what you need to do until those cloud runners are there. But in my professional opinion, trying to solve or optimize the cold start problem, where you create all 4 layers of your infrastructure, your foundational infrastructure, your platform infrastructure, your shared infrastructure, your application infrastructure in one Terraform command from top to bottom, is a fool's errand, because it's something you can't, there are things you cannot test automatically that way, and you're optimizing for the wrong workflow. You should be optimizing for day 2 operations, which is what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And optimizing for that is a different problem than optimizing for a cold start, bootstrap of a complete environment.
I like putting it as you're optimizing for day 2 operations. I think that's I'm guessing that's already a coined term.
I forget where it is, but you have like day 0 where you're setting everything up, and day 2, which is like where you're operating it.
Okay. That makes sense. So it sounds like, I mean, I know that, I'm liking this pattern. I have gone the more spin up everything for smaller projects. But for the current project that I'm on, it's much larger. We've sectioned things up pretty extensively, where, we have our base infrastructure, which is our VPC and maybe some like our RDS instance or something along those lines. We have our Postgres, which then updates our database infrastructure, which then updates our Postgres instance. And then we have Kubernetes infrastructure, which like spins up our cluster, spins up configuration maps or anything that we need out of our Terraform to supply that to Kubernetes. Do you do something similar with yours? I mean, it sounds like you do, of course, but then do you where are the lines for Cloud Posse projects? Maybe that's the question I'm asking at this point.
So this is some of our standard collateral for how we describe it. And I call it the 4 layers of infrastructure and where we draw those lines. So let me share that here. It's still loading here a little bit. All right. So is this visible to everyone?
Yep.
So what we have here at the top level, this is your foundation. This is where you lay the master AWS account. This is where you decide on your AWS account architecture. So your root account, your identity account, your networking account, your security account, your audit account, your production account, your staging account, your developer account, your sandbox account, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the IAM. This is your foundational IAM. This is how you set up cross-account access from your identity account to all your other accounts. This is how you set up your DNS architecture. So how do you delegate DNS zones to each account so you don't have a flat DNS architecture? You have a hierarchical DNS architecture where individual accounts have their own zone and can't affect other accounts' zones. This is what we call this foundation. You set it up once, you don't tear this down. You can't tear it down ever again because everything else is built on top of this. At some point, there's going to be a foundation, and that is this. This is so everything else after this point, after day 1, after day 0, is going to be for the rest of the longevity of this account is going to be day 2 operations. From there, it's and then one other point to note out, like this is for Amazon specifically, and Amazon has some interesting constraints about accounts. AWS accounts cannot be programmatically destroyed until a human has logged into that account, accepted some checkboxes, and at that point, you can destroy it. However, that email address that was associated with that account can never ever be used again. Now, Amazon supports plus addressing, So your accounts, you can have like, AWS plus random pet name or something, and that will let you create a new account with that thing. So my point here is the disposability of AWS accounts is not really worth pursuing.
Hey, Eric.
Yep.
This is Eric Berg. We have some conventions for, we cut a brand new account for each customer / environment.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And we use Plus. Actually, you're implicated in this story because we use plus notation for the email addresses. But I ran the what was that, TF destroy, whatever.
AWS.
Yeah. That shit is effective, and it was like way too effective. So I was like, I just gave up. But what I did was made sure to change both the alias on the account as well as the email. Like, do both of those things, and then you can spin up another account with those same properties, the name.
Before you destroy them, right?
Before you destroy it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
after you've destroyed it, game over. It is in a perpetual
you may have like a month. There may be a buffer where you can reinstate it, but I don't care because I would never don't rely on that.
Yeah. So so there's that, and then the other thing related to AWS accounts is when you're using plus addressing, that means all the emails go to one distribution list. And that means that account actually has root credentials that you can claim. So you can do a password reset using the root credentials for that account and then log into that account. So the only way to secure accounts that are created programmatically with Terraform is to also then, after provisioning it, log into that, do the password reset, get the login, log into that account, and set up MFA on that account so the bad actor doesn't do it for you. So with all these negatives, I totally write off the feasibility of doing programmatic AWS accounts and build up and tear down for testing. So next layer, platform. Platform to us means this is how you consistently operate your services, whether it be ECS or EKS. Whether it be Docker Swarm, we don't recommend it, or something else like that, Nomad. Platform, this is how you provide a standard service to your company. And you'll have multiple operating platforms. You'll have a production platform. You'll have a staging platform. You'll have a sandbox platform, etc. This has its own life cycle. When you upgrade Kubernetes, that has a life cycle decoupled from when you do continuous delivery of your applications. When you upgrade things like Cert Manager or external DNS, that is decoupled from when you're deploying your applications. That's the other layer that you should be separating everything with. The next layer on top of that are the shared services that your applications depend on that are running on your platform. So these are things like Jenkins. What if you're using Jenkins to run Terraform? Well, you can't do that until you even have your accounts, and you can't do that until you even have your platform. You can't do that until you have the cluster, and you can't do that until you deploy Jenkins, and you can't do that until you deploy Jenkins Operator or some of these other things. So my point is that has its own life cycle as well. That's decoupled from your applications. That's where you maybe also put things like Vault. Vault, like HashiCorp Vault would be a shared service. If you're using Keycloak as an IDP, that's another shared service. All right, then after that, it's finally the part that we all care about. It's the life cycle of your applications. This is where you do all your release engineering. This is where you have some of the backing services for your apps like S3 buckets and RDS databases and things like that. So when in this pattern here, if we're talking Terraform Cloud Runners, that's deployed as shared services. So that exists before you do anything related to RDS, because RDS is an application backing service, and that happens in layer 4. So when you follow this pattern, it simplifies some of those cold start problems for your applications, but not cold start problems across all 4 layers of infrastructure. And I think this is a major omission that's brought up when a lot of people talk about, like, yeah, we tear everything down every night and bring it back up again. I challenge that, at least if you're running infrastructure at the scale that we're familiar with operating at.
Where do you put VPC and subnet laydown? Is that DNS architecture in the top row there?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's obviously a big omission. But yeah, the VPCs and subnet architecture is foundational infrastructure.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And is RDS and Elasticache and all those types of services, are they in foundational as well?
No, those are all layer 4.
Okay.
Yeah. Those will change frequently, and those are related to the applications that you're deploying. So those are application backing services.
What's that Amazon service for Kubernetes that has been popping up a bunch for creating an RDS database or whatever using?
Oh yeah. Vlad, you remember what that one was called?
ACK is the. Fuck me. Hold up.
Yeah.
Is it the new operator? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the new operator.
Yeah.
K8s service.
AWS controller for Kubernetes.
Okay, AWS.
It looks early.
They renamed it like 3 times.
No, exactly. It's gone through a lot of names, which is why I'm so struggling to remember it. But this is the latest one. AWS controllers for K8s.
They did the same thing with the. Now it's named Copilot. It was initially named ECS CLI v2. I hate renames.
Wait, ECS CLI v2 is now called Copilot?
I think so, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard 3 names for that one as well.
So
they don't have RDS yet, but I know it's coming. But they have DynamoDB and S3 and SQS and SNS and ECR. All of those things I've used at some point or another, as infrastructural dependencies of an application. So it should make it really nice to be like, if I'm deploying GitLab to Kubernetes and I want to use S3 as its object store instead of Minio because S3 is more production ready, I can create S3 buckets in the same lifecycle as creating the GitLab deployment. And I would consider RDS to be in that same vein.
It is, but not the VPC, for example, right? The VPC, you wouldn't want that same thing.
Totally.
Exactly. So I think the biggest downside, I would say, to this new operator is, and I get it, I'm not criticizing it for it, but it's a major gap to having this end-to-end solution, is the lack of then also provisioning of the IAM roles that you'll need to access that S3 bucket securely. So that's still going to have to be terraformed. And apparently they've said as much that it's not going to support IAM.
I would partially agree. I think I would consider the roles to be part of either layer 1 and layer 2 here and have wildcards in those roles. So
Possibly, but if it's related to an application, if it's scoped to an application, these layers never know by name any application, so to say.
Mm-hmm. What about scoping to a team or a project or something, so that...
Yeah, possibly that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Vlad, you were saying?
Mention here. So the controllers are in developer preview. It's not even in alpha. So don't use them in production. It's going to be painful.
There's a Terraform one too, isn't there?
There is.
There is. That's in alpha because I don't think HashiCorp has a developer.
Oh, that one's not even in beta yet?
No, they're like super, super, super early.
What's cool about
This stuff is so bleeding edge that
like I wouldn't even use Plumi and CDK right now. They're moving way too fast. They have way too many breaking changes. I wouldn't put them in production. Yeah. And second thing I wanted to mention, you cannot create an EKS cluster and then connect to that cluster in the same Terraform run. There's a big warning in the Kubernetes provider. And it's very annoying.
That's still true?
They're not gonna fix it.
Yeah. Well, it is and it isn't. So we've had to work around it, and there's a very minimal, elegant fix to that. Which actually relates to your question earlier, Matt Gowie, about how do you defer these connection requests so that like the Terraform provider for Postgres doesn't error because the Postgres database doesn't exist yet. So for EKS node group, let's see if I can find it quickly enough. It was Andre on my team that implemented this. There's a
local exec bit?
It is a local exec, and those kind of suck, but they suck less if you just depend on one thing, which is curl. So actually, I think it's in the cluster, maybe.
Oh, you're doing a local exec to get the updated cluster details and then...
Well, a local exec to call curl to wait for the cluster health check to be okay, to be green. Yeah. And it's a pattern, I feel it's used in other EKS modules as well, so we're not original on that. Yeah, so wait for cluster command. So if you dig into the pattern that's here, this prevents the Kubernetes provider from trying to connect to the Kubernetes cluster before it starts up. And it connects to the Kubernetes cluster after this wait for cluster command is executed.
Even with the wait for cluster command, there are issues. If they're
certainly if you don't make your cluster API public. When you create an EKS cluster, you can choose, is it public or private?
But this is running in the Terraform Cloud Runner.
Well, okay.
Which is on-prem. Technically, I say that kind of facetiously is we're still not technically doing that, but we will be doing that in the next 4 weeks.
Yeah. I have been looking into ways to do it without the local exec, and I'm looking at doing remote exec for that stuff. So at least, if part of your provisioning is a bastion, then you can run a remote exec through that bastion, or even just one of the nodes that you spin up, right?
Yeah. No, that is the purpose of the remote exec that you're talking about. And you can also you can specify a bastion host, right, for running your Terraform local execs or remote execs.
Yeah.
Where was the pricing page? So what I wanted just to point out was something that was raised in the Terraform channel. I realized I'd started talking about it earlier and just got derailed. So who was it? Brought up a question earlier this week on the pros and cons of using Terraform Cloud. I feel like I've gone past it. Yeah, that was too low down. Oh, I guess I don't know where it is. Any other questions or observations? Oh, here it is. Evaluating Terraform Cloud for our team, wondering if anyone here is using Terraform Cloud currently. Maybe you can share some pros and cons, regrets, tips, and how that migration went from the open source version. And one of the things that was a big... So there were a bunch of cons with Terraform Cloud, by the way. but those have been addressed. And like one con was that you couldn't easily download the providers at runtime. You had to ship those in your repository as binaries. That's no longer a problem with Terraform 0.13. The other complaint was with Terraform Cloud, you couldn't have on-prem runners, kind of like GitLab runners or GitHub runners. Now they support that in the SaaS version of Terraform Cloud. This was in a recent announcement. I would say the biggest limitation right now is that you can't bring your own container to Terraform Cloud to run Terraform. Like, I think that would be really awesome if we could bring our own image that all the commands run in. Yes, I get it. All bets are off if we ship
Like
our
for
own
the
Terraform
Helm
image.
file provider or something.
Yeah, though the Helm file provider, Mumoshu is doing really awesome stuff with that. He's created a library called Shoal, and he's going to be linking Shoal into the Helm file provider. Shoal is all about managing binary dependencies for an application. So his and it what do you call it? It vendors them in a dot folder. So the Terraform Helm file provider is, I think, already, or if not now, eminently going to support downloading Helm diff, downloading Helm, downloading kubectl, downloading any other dependencies that it needs to operate. So
does that mean he's got a? I poked at Shoal and did not actually get a full understanding of it. But is he invoking Shoal from within the Helm file provider so that it downloads its own dependencies? Is that the deal?
Yes. Well, so I mean, it's a Go library that he's written.
Then yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah. So then he's just using that helper to do things. So Mumoshu has a lot of interesting projects that or libraries that he's working on. One is called DEP. So DEP is a way of generally managing remote dependencies and automatically updating them. Another one is Shoal, which is, like he says, a cross-platform package manager. Variant 2, which I talked about last week. Stuff like that. Right, so related to that, I just wanted to point out this announcement. I'll link it in the channel, is the new features of Terraform Cloud for Business. Thanks, Andre, for linking those other links. So we're out of time, but I think I want to come back to this question that you brought up, though, Matt, because the other part we didn't get to is something that I'm struggling with. Is best practice for Terraform, right? Is to break your state into lots of workspaces, right? So you don't have a Terralith. You don't have one Terraform plan for your entire infrastructure, because the scope of that is huge, the blast radius is huge, the time to run it is significant, the chance of errors happening greater, yada, yada, yada. But what do you do if you're managing 25, 30, 50 customer environments or 100 customer environments, and you decompose that into lots and lots of small little workspaces? So now suddenly you have, let's say you have 50 projects, 50 workspaces that comprise one customer environment. You have 100 customers, there's 5,000 workspaces. It's not scalable. So I think there's an argument to be made for certain kinds of like dedicated single tenant environments for like enterprise SaaS applications, where it should be reevaluated on a case-by-case basis. Maybe we want Terraliths for that. Maybe we want one module, because when we have one module that does it, Terraform calculates the DAG, the graph of what needs to change, what's dependent on what needs to be updated, what's out of date. But when you don't have Terraform, you got to implement the DAG your own way, and it's going to be optimistic at best and pale by the sophistication of Terraform.
I think that's a it's a unique problem to your business, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
But Vlad, you're shaking your head. Give me, are you?
I work a lot with SaaS companies, and they all have this problem. Like it gets weird because if you're a SaaS company, you're gonna get the big customer that's gonna be like, I want my own environment, even if you've never thought about that. There's gonna come a customer that's gonna demand their own environment, and they're gonna throw a truckload of money at you to convince you, and you're gonna say yes. And that's if you didn't already do multi-tenancy to a crazy level. But there's still, it gets weird for every company, for every SaaS. They all get like, oh my god, we ended up having so many different environments, and managing them is a pain. Also, like, I'm not in favor of premature optimization. Like, don't optimize for thousands of Terraform environments and workspaces if you have like 3. That's another time for it. Like, when you pass, I don't know, about 30, that's kind of the point where you really cannot do it manually or with GitHub automation or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that, yeah, you're right, actually, because that is a good point. The thing I was thinking was, Eric, you said customer, so I'm thinking, it's not people who are buying your software, but your customers actually, instead of when you have to spin up the
it's our customers' customers.
I'd be interested, in seeing, is that where you're rolling variant in, or what are you?
Yeah, and that's where we're rolling variant in right now, but I'm not saying that's the end all be all. I think variant is a better stopgap measure than using TerraGrunt for our opinion on how to do this. But whether you're using TerraGrunt, whether you're using variant or make or whatever it is, I think that what I want to have a conversation on maybe next week then on is like, how do you handle it? How do you handle when your account environments go beyond some moderately reasonable number, like say 20, let's say 30 is unreasonable, 50, 100, and having lots and lots of workspaces for that. I think that managing that is a different beast. Well, guys, we are out of time for today. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. We will have another session this time next week at 11:30 a.m. Pacific. We host these calls every week. If you haven't yet registered for our office hours, go to cloudposse.com/office hours. It's the third link here, cloudposse.com/office hours. If you've missed our past recordings, our past sessions, you can always head over to cloudposse.com/podcast. We have all the past recordings available for streaming on your mobile phone or however you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to work with Cloud Posse at some point in the future, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz, and we're looking forward to talking with you. Have a great week, guys. Talk to you later.